Okay, we're going to start. This is mitzvah 31. The Chinuch explains what is this mitzvah? Mitzvah Kiddush Shabbos b'dvarim. It's a positive commandment to sanctify Shabbos with words. It's acknowledging Shabbos by saying certain expressions to identify exactly what is Shabbos, to quantify it. To acknowledge Shabbos at the entry point, that's Friday night, and at the exit point, when it concludes, which is Saturday night. Meaning, just as Kiddush is a Torah obligation, the Rambams of the opinion, Havdalah, we say, Havdil ben Kodesh l'chol, is a Torah law, which we discuss, is many hold it's only rabbinical. Acknowledging Shabbos at the entry, at the beginning, is a Torah law, and nobody argues. However, on the conclusion, that's an argument, whether it's rabbinical or Torah. The Chinuch follows the position of the Rambam. The Rambam is of the position, of the opinion, just as Kiddush is a Doraisa, is a Torah obligation, Havdalah is a Torah obligation. Okay? Shia bohem zeche gedulas hayom umaloso. There should be a remembrance of the greatness of the day, why the day is special, umaloso, and its level of distinction. V'havdaloso shevach, and you're discerning between it and the ordinary weekday in the most praiseworthy manner. More than the days that preceded it and the days that will follow it. So that's why you acknowledge it at the entry when the special day begins, and to discern between the special day and what's becoming ordinary, again, you make that discernment. No. Every day at the end of if you pray Ashkenaz, an Ashkenaz nusach tradition, the morning service ends with the Yom. Hayom Yom Rishon. Today's the first day. What do we say? Hayom Yom Rishon b'Shabbos. It's the first day leading towards Shabbos. That means not only Shabbos itself, the seventh day, there's an obligation to acknowledge the day to be so special. And every aspect of the day. There's no day comparable to that day. You speak about why that day innately is more praiseworthy, and it has a certain character which no other day has. It's so special that even during the weekday, we acknowledge the upcoming Shabbos that's going to take place. It's the first day by Shabbos. Yom Sheni b'Shabbos, Shlishi b'Shabbos, Shishi b'Shabbos. Shabbos, Hayom Yom Shabbos Kodesh. Today, it's Shabbos itself. We've arrived. It's the holy Shabbos. That's what it is. Okay? Shenemar. Where do we see that there is a mitzvah to acknowledge a day, and it's a fulfillment of positive commandment? Zoches Yom Shabbos L'Kacho. In the first set of tablets, which we'll read about next week in Parshas Yisro, in the 10th commandments, it says, Zochor Yom Shabbos L'Kacho. Remember the Shabbos and sanctify it. Klomar, what does those words mean? Chinuch is speaking. Zochreu Zecher Kedusha Gedula. When you mention it, it should be in the context of holiness and greatness. And that's what we speak about. It has a special distinction. To speak about why it's so praiseworthy and special. And explicitly, our Chachamim told us, we're obligated to say it on a cup of wine. These praiseworthy statements, this acknowledgement of the seventh day, it should be said on a cup of wine. So we'll see. There's an argument among the Rishonim. Everybody agrees to drink the Kiddush wine is rabbinical. But to say what you have to say which the words are definitely a Torah obligation, on a Torah level, does it have to be said on a cup of wine, or even that's rabbinical? It's a machlokes rishonim. It's an argument among the earlier commentators. Some say the drinking's rabbinical, but it has to be said on a cup of wine, similar to the libations in the Beis Hamikdash. When they poured the libations, they said certain mizmori tilim, they said certain psalms. Identically, when you say this praiseworthy statement, which is a Torah obligation, you say it in a cup of wine. Shekenu apirush zachreu al hayayin, and that's the meaning. Zachreu, remember it, al hayayin, on a cup of wine. From the Chinuch, the way it seems, it's a doraisa. Because he says the connotation of zachreu means in the most special setting. What's the most special setting? On a cup of wine. The drinking is rabbinical, but the saying, that is a doraisa. That's a Torah obligation. Okay? Now, how much wine do you have to have in the cup that it's an appropriate cup to say this kiddush on it? So now he's speaking halacha, the chinuch. Either you put a quarter of a pint of undiluted wine, because it's wine, or it's diluted. If it's undiluted, it's not as potable. It's strong. If it's diluted, it's more pleasant to drink. Or yosem revius. Or you can even have more than a quarter of a pint. Okay? Meaning the minimum is you must have minimally a revius, a quarter. Avolo pochs means that you cannot have less than a revius, a quarter of a pint. There's a question what a pint is. We know what a pint is, but I'm saying what is a halacha? Is it Rav Moshe Feinstein holds that 2.9 ounces is a revius. So evidently, he's of the opinion a log is not 16 ounces. Because it would be 16 ounces, a quarter 16 ounces is 4 ounces. So if he holds 2.9, it's 4 times that. That's a quarter of that. Okay? The Chazon Ish is of the opinion that a revius halog, a quarter of a log, is 4.2 ounces. Okay? So meaning it's more than 16 ounces. A pint is more than 16 ounces. It's what? It's 16.2 times 4. Okay? That's what it is, because a quarter is 4.2. Now, to what degree should it be diluted? You know, if you take wine and you dilute it too much, it loses the status of wine. It's called water that has a taste of wine in it. Is what's called diluted wine. Hamaziga yudua. He says the known ratio between wine and water is, which is the most appropriate. Shichelek al echod shel yain chai. It's a 3-to-1 ratio. 1 quarter wine, the rest 3/4, 3 parts water. That's the dilution. And what do you say on that cup of wine? What's the text? It's the nusach, it's the text that's known among all Jews, which the Kiddush we say. Whether the Ashkenazic, Sephardic, whatever, it's the same text, maybe 1 or 2 words different, and it concludes the same way. Baruch atah Hashem mekadesh Shabbos. God is the one who sanctifies Shabbos. Chebitzis Shabbos, Gam Kim Vorchen Alayah L'chvod Hayom. At the exit point, when Shabbos is over, you make that acknowledgement to discern between the day and what's following. Lahavdil bein achol bein hakodesh. Again, you make say that Havdalah on a cup of wine. And the blessing we say to conclude that blessing is Baruch Hashem Hamavdul B'Kodesh L'Chol. That's the conclusion. Hamavdul, he discerns between Kodesh and Chol. That's the chinuch. Okay? Now, what is the philosophical background? And the chinuch speaks about the philosophical background on Kiddush. Why is it so important to make this acknowledgement? To discern between the seventh day having the special innate value, praiseworthiness. Why do we have an obligation, week in and week out, to make this acknowledgement at the beginning and as it closes, which is called Havdalah? Why? So he explains, Misharshei mitzvah. What is the fundamental root of this mitzvah, philosophical understanding? Because we should be aroused through this action, which is Kiddush and the statement, to remember the greatness of this day. This day has a level of uniqueness and specialness. V'nikva b'levavenu. That is very important. And it should be implanted in our hearts. Emunah chidush olam. The belief that God created the world. The world was not random. It was ex nihilo, and God created this world. 6 days were the process of creation, and the seventh day, he refrained from creation. Therefore, we have an obligation to make this statement together with wine, on a cup of wine. What's the reason? It says something. When does a person have a greater capacity for joy, to celebrate something? When he's sated and he's happy. So what's wine? Wine is something that makes you happy. It has that ability. Based on the arousal of a person and his action that impacts on a person and leaves that fond memory even beyond that moment. You know, it's interesting. A person doesn't have a unique, special memory, but you have a one-of-a-kind of experience. You're touched. You will never forget that experience for the rest of your life. So if every Shabbos you experience that Shabbos in that special, unique way, and you appreciate what it is, and you're aroused by it, and you're touched by it, and you enjoy it at that special level, that experience will remain with you beyond Shabbos. And we're saying this is to indicate and to implant the person's heart the world was created. And it's always been here. It's not random, but rather it is because God created the world in 6 days and nights. Based on this principle, that when you eat and that food brings joy to you, let's say a person prefers bread over wine. You know, his wife bakes that special Shabbos challah, and when he says Kiddush over that and he eats it, it brings him to another level. It satisfies him and brings joy to him. When he eats that kind of food, that takes priority over wine. Because a person is aroused to what he desires. That's the food I desire. This is a special moment. And because you're experiencing that special moment, you have a greater capacity to be in another mindset to fully absorb what we're saying. The statement that's said over that bread. Even though for Havdalah, it's the acknowledged day at the exit point. You can't use bread for Havdalah. Everybody agrees. For Kiddush, yes. For Havdalah, not. Gamke Tzotru. But nevertheless, it hasn't been refuted. On the entry point, it's one thing. On the exit point, it's the same, but it's not necessarily the same. Torah Shlema, Yivchu L'Olam, Berov. Ubemes ki rov olam isave al ashtio b'motzei Shabbos yos min achila. Most people only want to drink at night. You know, after eating a full Shabbos meal, 3 meals, do you have room? Do you have any interest in eating motzei Shabbos after Shabbos? No. But a drink, a person doesn't want to drink. So because by the time Shabbos you're filled to your capacity, therefore it doesn't have that uniqueness, that specialness. But when you drink the wine, and that minimum measure of wine, it's going to do something to you. Kirov olam is ave el ashtio. B'motzei Shabbos, yosim in achila. A person would prefer to drink wine than eat food. Motzei Shabbos. You've already a major meal during the Shabbos meal. We're talking about the second meal. And I always say, you know, in the winter, in the summer when you eat shalashot, it's going to be quite a few hours after you eat lunch, second meal. So you're slightly hungry. Do you eat that meal, the Shem Shemayim, purely for the sake of the mitzvah? Right? Especially if it's attractive food, delicious food. Of course, you know you're eating shalashudis, but it satisfies you. What about in the winter? You just finished eating lunch, and also now you have to wash again and eat bread, and it takes a little bit of fish. Eating l'shem shamayim. Person that eats usually a Shabbos meal, when it comes shalashudis in the winter, you're not hungry to any degree. So why are you eating it? Because there's a mitzvah to eat it. So there, it's really connected to the acknowledgement. So he says, since the majority of people, Motzei Shabbos, they don't invest the time in eating, but rather in drinking. So therefore, through which should the acknowledgement come? Through eating, through drinking, and not through eating. Therefore, Motzei Shabbos, bread has no relevance. You can't say Havdalah on bread. But on wine, or we'll see later, Chamar Medina, if it's a beverage of the land, that qualifies for the Kiddush to be said on it. But bread, according to no one, does it qualify. I have to just take the Chinuch, the Minchas Chinuch writes, it says the mitzvah is to say words, to speak about the specialness and why the day is so praiseworthy and its level of distinction. Dinim Melum Vor Rambam, Perek Chavtes Mishabes. He says, this is what the Chinuch says, the Rambam discusses in laws of Shabbos. Dini Kiddush Aruchim. The laws which pertain to Kiddush are very lengthy. Therefore, it's discussed in a lengthy manner by the early commentators and later commentators. Therefore, he's only address it to only make a few comments, which the others don't discuss. Firstly, see, there's certain mitzvahs that even if you meditate it, you think it, you fulfill the mitzvah. For instance, Avos Hashem. There's a mitzvah to love God. Do you have to verbalize it? You don't have to verbalize it. There's a mitzvah to revere God. You don't have to verbalize it. Here, you have to actually articulate the words. It's not enough to think the words. Kimvur kanu berambam halacha aleph poskim, as he says here, ledaber dvorim, to speak words of praise and distinction, that people should appreciate the difference between the Shabbos and a weekday, the days that precede it and days that follow. Al behir lo yotza, just with meditation, thinking, you do not fulfill the obligation. Although it seems from the Gemara Megillah, it's clear. There's a mitzvah to remember what Amalek did to us. So the word is Zachor es asher osach Amalek. Remember what Amalek did to us. Hainu believe. I would say, you remember in your heart, remember in the heart. Rak shom lo sishkach, it says Zachor, and says you shall not forget. Remember what Amalek did to us, and you should not forget. So over there, because it says lo sishkach, evidently, zochor means more than just thinking it in your mind. Because it would be enough to say lo tishkach, don't forget it, just think about it. So what does zochor mean? You should remember. It means verbal articulation. Al korach zochainu bepeh. It's quoting Gemara. So evidently, zochor means to verbalize it, to articulate it. Imkein kan. So we have a problem. So here it's not so simple. Regarding remember what Amalek did to us, since it says lo tishkach, you should not forget, that already indicates just thinking it, your heart. So the Torah says zochor, remember means verbalization. But by Kiddush, it doesn't say, it just says zochor. Zochor can mean remembering in your mind. Where do we see there's any indication you must verbalize it? In Kain kan kstiv rak zochor. So how do we know that zochor by Shabbos, regarding Shabbos, means you have to verbalize it? Maybe thinking it's enough. Take a cup of wine, just think about what it's about, and that's enough. Dainu believe. He says, the response that it's written by the Shagas Aryeh. Who's the Shagas Aryeh? The Vilna Gaon says the Shagas Aryeh, his name was Yudah Leib Ginsburg. He lived the same time as the Vilna Gaon, and the Vilna Gaon said about him that the only person who is his equal in the revealed Torah is the Shagas Aryeh. In the hidden Torah, there's no one who's his equal. But in the revealed Torah, so he wrote a work on responsa, dealing with these issues. So there he addresses this issue. Why do we say that the Torah obligation of Kiddush, you must verbalize it? Because from the Gemara, it would be indicated that just meditating it is enough. So Siman Yud Gimel, maybe Divi Ramban. He quotes the Ramban Nachmanides, B'Shem Sifro, the Zochga B'Shabbos Hu B'Peh. When it says Zochas Yom Shabbos L'Kacho, regarding Shabbos, it means you must verbalize it. Di B'Leiv Kosva Torah Shamor. Now, we find that Shabbos is mentioned in the first set of tablets and the second set of tablets. In the first set of tablets, it says Zochor Yom Shabbos L'Kacho. Remember the Shabbos and sanctify it. The second set of tablets, it says Zochor. It says Shamor Yom Shabbos L'Kacho. You should observe it. What's observing? Observing means being passive. Observe it. So if you have to observe it, what are you observing? That means you have to think about what you're observing. So from the Shamor, it would be indicated that you're thinking about it. So what does the doctor write in the first set of commandments? Zochor, remember. Evidently, it means more than think about it, because if you're supposed to not cross the line, which is the Shamor, observe it. And when to observe something, you have to think about it. So what is the Zochor? So evidently, the Zochor, remembering it means through articulation, through verbalization. That's from there we know that you have to say the Kiddush, you have to say the words, you have to verbalize them. The belev kosva shamor, hainu belev, zochar hainu bepeh. Ein shom gam kein, v'shapil b'ledeinu yotz b'hiru rak b'dibur. So, okay, therefore one does not fulfill this obligation by meditating it, but you have to verbalize it. When you say the Kiddush, it's understood. If you want it, we know that usually the custom is one person says for Kiddush and all those are present, they hear the Kiddush, and the order says the Kiddush has a mind to cover them, and they have a mind to be covered. So it's understood. Unless you verbalize it, they don't hear anything. We're speaking about to fulfill the mitzvah just for yourself. Maybe you fulfill the mitzvah just by meditating and thinking about it. So we're showing no. From the word Zachor, it's indicated here, it means you must verbalize it. So even if you think it and you're just covering yourself, if you do not verbalize it, you did not fulfill your obligation. I'll tell you something interesting that we've been learning. We learned in the Rambam, in the laws of Tshuva, the Shai Tshuva, what exactly is repentance. When a person repents, what we call Tshuva, you have to have remorse. You have to make a commitment to the future that you're never going to cross that line again. That's what Tshuva is. You committed not to go back there. What about a person feels the remorse in his heart and makes the commitment, a mental commitment, but he doesn't verbalize the remorse and does not verbalize the commitment for the future? That's called confession. Confession means verbally you have to confess. Unless you have verbal confession, one is not atoned. You have to have verbal confession. It's based on psukim, on verses. Okay? So there also, it's not enough to think, feel the remorse, and commit yourself mentally not to go back there, but rather you have to actually make the confession. And who are you confessing to? You're confessing to God. When we say the Amidah, what is considered the service of the heart? Zu tefillah. That's tefillah, what we call the Amidah. If the person would just meditate the Amidah, you think it. You don't say the words. And according to Rambam, it's Torah obligation. Tefillah once a day, once in the 24-hour period is a Torah obligation. I read it rather than saying it. One does not fulfill his obligation. You have to verbalize it. Many people don't know, especially if they're Bali Tshuva. They take a sitter and they just run their finger quickly back over the words. As much as you understand the words, as much as you're touched by the words, unless you say the words, one does not fulfill his obligation of tefillah, of Amidah. You have to say it. Similar, Zohar, we're going to be not too far off. Shabbos Zohar, you have to say it. We hear it from the Balkore, it's the equivalent as if we said it. Like Kiddush, you must say the Kiddush, you hear it from the one who's saying the Kiddush, his saying becomes your saying. It's as if you said it. The position of the Chinuch, Kedasa Rambam per Chavtes, Halach Aleph, the Gam Havdolah Himin Torah. We mentioned this. The Chinuch writes, just as at the entry point, you must acknowledge the specialness of Shabbos. On the exit point, you must acknowledge and make a discernment between the Shabbos that's ending and the ordinary day that's following. There are other earlier commentators that rule differently. Kiddush is a doraisa, as we call it a posuk, Zochus Yom Shabbos Lakacho, but Havdalah, it's only rabbinical. Ein Shem Rav Magid Poskim. Okay? V'da. He writes, "Da mitzvah min haTorah l'daber dvorim shel kavod." What is the Torah mitzvah? Which is the Kiddush. To speak words which express the specialness of Shabbos. Speak about why Shabbos' day has to be treated differently than the weekday. Kol echad lefi tzachus l'shono. Each person according to his ability of expression. I'll give you an example. The Gemara quotes a posuk in the prophets that the way we speak on Shabbos should be different than we speak during the weekday. The way we walk on Shabbos should not be the way we walk during the weekday. The way we attire ourselves on Shabbos, it should be different than we attire ourselves during the weekday. What is this? During the weekday, we speak about financial issues. On Shabbos, you're not permitted to speak about business. So that means the burcha shel Shabbos lo kidurcha shel chol. The speech, the subject matter you speak on Shabbos should not be the subject matter which you speak on the weekday. Of course, on Shabbos we don't do business, we don't transact, we don't do commercial transactions. So therefore, Shabbos we don't. During the week, we walk quickly, we hurry, we rush, we take large strides. Shabbos, you take shorter strides. You don't take large strides. Why? The hiluch, the walking on Shabbos should be different than you walk during the weekday. Although when you're going to shul, Shabbos morning, you're permitted and you should walk quickly. She'll say, but it's like you're walking during the weekday. Why during the weekday do we hurry and rush? Because we're going to do something which has great value. So you mean going to shul has less value than rushing to do something financial? You should rush to shul, hurry to shul. Not walk leisurely and show up 20 minutes late. The mitzvah is to acknowledge Shabbos, even the way we walk differently. So normally, walking home for shul, you walk slowly. unless you have to rush. Somebody have to rush. People are waiting. But if you don't have to rush, you don't walk quickly. But going to shul, no matter what, even if you be on time, you should walk more quickly. Not like you have all the time in the world. Dressing. You have a suit you normally wear to the office on during the week. Shabbos, even though it's a very conservative suit, you should have a suit that's designated for Shabbos. This is the Shabbos suit. I remember many years ago, we had a special person who was part of the Yad Ram, passed away. It's going to be 12 years now. His name was Ziggy Weil. Ziggy Weil was a very special person. He was a Talmud Chacham. He was a very first-class businessman. He was a person who was very involved in communal activities, and he wore a big kippah sruga, big knitted yarmulke. When it came to daven, he had a velvet yarmulke in his talis bag. He would take off the kippah sruga and put on the velvet yarmulke. He would daven with the velvet yarmulke. He had a special yarmulke, not kippah, a special yarmulke he would wear when he would daven. The way I identify outside of davening, I wear my kippah sruga. When I stand before God and say the Amidah with my tefillin, I wear the velvet yarmulke. Again, to discern, this is a different moment than any other moment during the day. Shabbos, you wear the attire. Although it's respectful, we're not talking about dressing informally on Shabbos. You're dressing conservatively, but the garment, the attire you wear on Shabbos should be different. It should be recognizable minimally to yourself. You're wearing a different kind of suit. The covered Shabbos. Rabbi Vad Yosef has a question. What about shoes? But it says attire, does it include shoes? Or no, you can wear the same shoes that you wear during the weekday or as you wear on Shabbos. So he brings proofs, Rabbi Vad Yosef, that attire means garments. It's not referring to the shoes. You can have the same pair of shoes you wear for the weekday as you wear on Shabbos. What about a hat? Could you wear the same? Again, he brings proof. It doesn't refer to the hat. You can wear that weekday hat you can wear on Shabbos also. The attire, the clothing. The clothing don't include the hat. The hat you wear when you leave the house. In the house, you don't wear a hat. So the attire is the jacket, the shirt, the pants, the tie you wear, that's the attire. But the hat, you wear the same hat during the week. Shabbos, it's not a problem. You wear the same hat. Okay? So he's saying the mitzvah is to speak about Shabbos in the most respectful way. Each person expresses it in his own terms. But the text of Kiddush is not a Torah obligation. As long as you can use your own words, it's okay. See, when you say the Shema in any other language, the Shema has to be said, the translation has to be accurate. Whatever the Hebrew word is, you have to have a translation of that word. Because the mitzvah is to say the Shema as it was prescribed by the Torah. The mitzvah of Shabbos is Zochas Yom Shabbos L'Kacho. Remember it in the most praiseworthy way. So the text is not, there's no specific text in the Torah. We say Vayechulim. But if you express it differently, based on your own ability, you fulfill the Torah obligation. It's the concept. And these various texts were legislated by the men of the High Assembly. The blessing, you have to have Shema Malchus. Right? When we conclude, we conclude, said the Shema Malchus, you have the name of God and you acknowledge him as the King of the universe. It concludes, Baruch Atah Hashem Mekadosh Shabbos. You only have the appellation of God, okay? What's the primary aspect of film mitzvah? You have to speak about the special distinction of the day. Why is it so distinct? because God created the world. God ceased creation on the seventh day of creation. You eat to a sated point, you have to acknowledge God. You eat, you're sated, you must bless God. The nusach, the text, is only, that was legislated by Moshe Rabbeinu, by Yeshua ben Nun. Therefore, the concepts are Doraisa. What's contained within those blessings are Torah. But the text itself is not a Torah text. The Torah just says, you will eat, you'll be sated, you bless God. So if you want to acknowledge God differently, you fulfill your Torah obligation. I'm Beis Yosef, Matur, or Chaim Reish Simin Kuf Pei Zayin. Beis Yosef was the commentator on the tour. B'Shem Rashba, Varosh, Brochus Mem Chesed Beis, Gam B'Shem Ramban. The Birchas HaMozen Himin Torah. The concept which is contained within the benching, the first three blessings, those concepts are Torah concepts. You have to express those concepts. But the text, the exact those words, Einu Min Torah. That's all legislated by Moshe Rabbeinu, by Yeshua, by Achikirat Sagadola. Vochanami Zeposhet. Same thing Kiddush. There's no specific words to say for Kiddush. As long as you speak about it and you express it and you address the issues what it's meant to be expressed in your own language, it's sufficient. You fulfill your Torah obligation. Ayin Shagasari Simshet Hanal Achato Shetiknu Chazal Hanusach. But now that the rabbis they promulgated, they legislated the text, how you say benching. It must be introduced with a blessing that has the name of God and he's acknowledged as the king. He only spoke, he used his own vernacular, his own expression. He did not say Shema Malchus Efsher. Maybe. He's not saying conclusively. Atman Torah liyotze. Maybe one is not even yotze at a Torah level. Because once Chazal have the power to legislate something and the Torah acknowledges it, that's what it is. And now that if you do it differently, one does not fulfill his Torah obligation. It's the same thing with Kiddush. Maybe now that you have to acknowledge it with a blessing, which is after you say it by Yachulu, if you don't say that blessing, one is not Yotzei. One, even though you said in your own words, I'll give you an example. If one has a question whether he said Kiddush or not, Friday night, what's the law? You have to repeat Kiddush. Why? Since Kiddush is a Torah obligation, if you're in doubt, you have to repeat it. But we're saying now, the blessing's only rabbinical. Let's say he remembers he said Vayechulu. Remembers he said Vayechulu. He doesn't recall if he said the blessing. But the blessing was there. Who is it authored by? It was authored by the men of the High Assembly. So the text is rabbinical. So what do we say? Safi Rabban L'Kula. It's since the text is only legislated rabbinically, whenever you're in doubt regard to a rabbinical obligation, you deal with lenient. The answer is no. Once they said this is the way you fulfilled, you expressed the Torah obligation, it becomes a Safi Doraisa. Although you said the way it doesn't make a difference. Broch Shir Aleph, Dive Mas Toni, the Chol Mokshe Tiknu Chazal b'Mitzvahs Doraisa. Wherever Chazal they legislate laws pertaining to Torah mitzvah, v'lo osekain lo yotza klal. For instance, famous for Rabbeinu Yonah, the Mishnah says, first Mishnah says in Brachos that Krishma at night you should say it before midnight. Why? Because if you procrastinate and you leave it beyond that, there's a chance you may fall asleep and you may not say Kriya Shema. So unless the person had no choice, but let's say a person deliberately delayed Kriya Shema till after midnight, and now you want to say it. Torah doesn't put a time limit. Torah says you could fulfill the mitzvah Kriya Shema at night as long as people are sleeping. After midnight, people are still sleeping. So Chazal said you should not intentionally leave it till after midnight. Person chose to leave it after midnight. He procrastinated. And he says it. Is he credited on a Torah level if he said it after midnight? Rabbeinu Yonah says in Brachos you get no credit for it. Because once Chazal say it has to be said before midnight, and you only fill your obligation every night midnight if it's inadvertently forgotten earlier, but if you deliberately left it for after, one does not fulfill his obligation. So we see, even though on a Torah level, you fulfilled your obligation, but if the rabbi said it's this period, not that period, they have the ability to negate the mitzvah, and it has no value. So if Chazal said this is the way you yotzei Birchas Hamazon by using this text, using any other text, praising God, acknowledging God, it's not enough. You're not going to fulfill your obligation. That's what he's saying over here. I Pri Megadim Lor Chaim. The Pri Megadim is the commentator on the Shulchan Aruch. Psichol El Schel Gimel Ches Dem also b'mezid lo yotze klal. Ubeonis yotze min haTorah. If a person deliberately didn't do it the way the Chachamim legislated it, you do not fulfill your obligation at Torah level. If it was something beyond your ability, then yes. If your opinion is saying it on the cup of wine is only rabbinical, and you didn't say it on the coast, and you deliberately chose not to say it on the coast, not speaking, person didn't have wine, you chose not to say it, one does not fulfill his Torah obligation. The old nafkamino, he says many times these applications he discussed elsewhere. This is not the time to speak lengthily about this. Ayin o Zayin Gamkin. Okay. We're going to stop here.